Excellent. Right. Well, we're going to get going. So let me just start by saying thank you so much for joining the webinar today. We're talking about the secrets of successful scaling. It's not quite a tongue twister, but it's pretty close. And it's all about providing a bit of a CEO's guide to scaling, growing your business, getting bigger. So this is the third in our 2025 webinar series, and our aim is just to share some of our expertise and give you some practical takeaways on building your business. So that's whether you're leading a fast-growing startup, preparing to scale, or supporting others through growth, you're in the right place. Scaling is one of the most exciting and challenging phases of business. It's when everything speeds up: decisions, people, risk, opportunity. And while product and market matter deeply, it's the people side that often can make or break growth. So that's exactly why we've brought together two brilliant guests today to share their insights, not from theory, but from practical experience. I am delighted to welcome, there we go, got a slide ready for you all. Delighted to welcome Saurav Chopra from 5minutes.ai and formerly of Perkbox. So Saurav co-founded and scaled Perkbox from 3 founders up to 250 people, delivering 50 times return for investors. And he's now building a new business called 5minutes.ai, which is an AI-powered TikTok-style training tool, which makes learning frictionless. And I'm also delighted to have Vic Foster with me. She's an experienced people director with the People Puzzles team. She's got a proven track record of driving talent strategy and organizational growth in multiple startup and scale up SMEs across many sectors and locations. And today, to give this webinar a little bit of structure, we're going to explore 3 key areas. The first section is all going to be about laying the foundations for scale. So we're going to look at vision, hiring, culture, and leadership mindset. The second section is going to be about building scalable infrastructure, so systems, processes, management, compliance. And the third section all about managing that human side of growth. So change management, communication, retention, and leadership during scale. And of course, there are other aspects like finance, but that isn't our focus for today. So let's get into understanding some of the common pitfalls and how to really unlock real people-powered growth. So I'm going to stop my slides so you can see my lovely guests in more of their glory. And let me get going with my first question. So Saurav, I'm going to start with you. Welcome, by the way.
Thank you for having me. Really excited to be here and excited about the partnership that we're building.
Fantastic. So can you kick us off by telling us a little bit about mindset? So what mindset shifts were important when you were moving from startup to scale up?
Yeah, definitely. So, obviously, as you're going through that journey, lots of things happen. So first, we went from about 25 people to about 215, 3.5 years time. And there's lots of shifts that need to happen, not just for the founders, but the exec team, the early employees. And fundamentally, it changes from becoming, a product and growth and, revenue folk obsessed mindset, which again, in tech, we do have a lot, and I'm sure in other industries as well, to more people obsessed, because ultimately they are the ones who are going to deliver, for the business. So firstly, I think, instead of doing everything on your own as you do as founders and, early team members, it's about how do you build that kind of what I call the leaders of leaders, right? So you almost want, your different team leaders to be operate and think like mini CEOs with that, that independence, that the desire to take risks. So that's one thing, which is around, hey, it's not about me, it's not about the core team. In the beginning, doing everything, is about how do you build that leaders of leaders. The second mindset shift, which is very important, is and I personally, had to really work hard on this. Is in the early days, it's about speed at all costs. And when you get to a certain point, when things are happening, things are moving, you've got the go-to-market fit. It's really about how do you make things scalable? How do you make things repeatable? So it's about repeatability at scale. And so things move from, hey, just get this done, to more like, what are the, how do I optimize the processes so at least 80% of my outcomes are scalable, repeatable? How do you delegate things? How do you codify internal knowledge? Codifying internal knowledge is really, really key, because capturing those systems, capturing those processes, capturing what's in people's heads, is really, really key. So it's about repeatability at scale. And again, the third thing is really around, how do you, the mindset shift is around how do you think about things, right? So again, in the early days, you're thinking like weeks, days, hey, this is what we're going to launch next week, next month. And then you just start thinking and planning because again, you're thinking about repeatability at scale. You're thinking about these teams who are going to be managing these projects. You start thinking about a much longer horizon, 6 months, 12 months, and so on and so forth. And you have to align the resources and the capital and your systems to that. So that's a very, very important shift in thinking as well.
Yeah, I feel such familiarity with this as you're talking about it from our People Puzzles journey. Vic, I'm keen to get your take on this because, oh, actually, before I jump to Vic, I'm going to ask you a bit more, Saurav. So
Yeah.
tell us a bit about your early hiring decisions. Do you think that they impacted your ability to grow successfully?
Yeah, definitely. So I think they impacted, mostly positively, but we also, as we do always, make mistakes. So obviously, the early hires are really, really key, right? So the first 5, 10 hires you have in the business, they kind of, almost set the precedent for everybody else you hire. So we were very, very fortunate to have some really brilliant, creative people and independent people, which kind of set the stage for success for us. In the future, and as we do initially, the focus is you're hiring again. That's one of the thing in terms of shifts, which you talked about earlier. Initially your hiring is really in the startup phase. You're focusing on versatile people, right, who can do multiple things. Our product guy, I remember, he's a brilliant guy. Our first product manager, he also built the whole Salesforce system that we had. He also built our help desk and our marketing ecosystem. So that was this really versatile, talented individual. Then obviously as you grow, we realized that, oh, hang on a second, this Salesforce was amazing when we had 1,000 customers. Now we have 5,000. This just doesn't work. So then you start getting it, the more specialists, domain experts to have that repeatability at scale. I think one of the things that we did really, really well in the early days was that, while obviously people being really good at what they do, the skills and the professional expertise was important. One thing we hired very carefully for was, are they going to be a culture fit? Are their values aligned to our values? And we were very, very fortunate that the bonding experience that happened at Perkbox, even as the business grew from 25 to 200, 250, was really, really strong. Still, the people are incredible friends. And I think when you have the right people with the right values who align with your mission of the business, work together, you just create a brilliant team that, when the business is accelerating, grows very, 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 very nicely, and everybody's happy. So I think we did a really, really good job in that. And obviously, probably a bit further down the line, and there's something I could do differently, definitely, is that we put in some hiring systems and processes in place in terms of, making it almost a playbook of hiring for managers. Here's how you hire. Here's the kind of people you're looking for. Here's you analyze them on skills, making it a lot more structured. So I think that was a good, hiring process decision, but perhaps it came a bit later than in the game than we should have introduced it. So going back, I would change that bit around hiring. But yes, obviously the early hiring set the stage for success for the future, simply because we managed to get so many incredible people to work for us.
Yeah, I mean, when businesses are booming and really exciting, I guess you've got that opportunity to attract some really exciting people. But do you think there were ever times in that scale up phase where you felt you got stuck? And have you got any stories or examples of where you maybe managed to unstick yourself to go on that next bit of growth?
Yeah, yeah, 100%. So I think in terms of getting stuck, there were always these situations where you're growing so fast, everybody's excited, the business is booming, and you are seeing the numbers, but obviously you're at a size when you're not really always necessarily on top of what your front line and what the people who are at the coal face are facing. So and what I found was there was a bit of a disconnect, right, where where people are like, hey, at the top are like, hey, wow, this is amazing, we're growing so much, everybody's happy, we're doing these all hands celebrations, all that. And you talk to people who are doing the day to day, and there was a disconnect. There's a disconnect in terms of, hey, what are we doing? What's our mission? What do we stand for? What's our long-term goal? So you ask different people in the business, and they had different views. Some people thought, hey, we're an employee experience platform. Some people thought, hey, we just do perks. And they didn't understand why we're building these other products. and why you're focusing so much time on other products when we are a Perks business. So there's a bit of a disconnect in terms of, you know, what people thought was the mission of the business or the purpose of the business. That was our first thing that was where we got stuck. The other one was around, you know, we had so much growth that we were, you know, promoting people from within. So we had these very, very talented people who were amazing individual contributors, and all of a sudden, 6 months they became managers, and we perhaps did not focus as much as we should have on, you know, training them, empowering them as with the right toolkits and the right knowledge and the right skills to become really good managers. You know, you're great individual contributors does not mean that you'll become amazing managers. So that was another one, which was where, you know, we and this is when we started really seriously collecting proper feedback on what's really going on beyond the numbers and the buzz that you see yourself in the, you know, the press and whatnot. What's actually, you dig in, you start figuring out what's going on behind the scenes, talking to the people. That's when we figured out these things. Technologically, there was another thing where people were using all kinds of different systems, which became a nightmare. You know, anyone could start a new tool, and that obviously creates more technical problems. But that's easier to fix than, you know, the people issues. So we basically, you know, for a period of time, I was thinking it was 2-3 months, you know, we just stopped hiring, and we went back, and, you know, we brought in a really awesome HR director, you know, who actually helped us, you know, get these things under control, so that you know, we improved the overall employee satisfaction and obviously manager upskilling. So we started building these programs, and that meant slowing down the business for a little bit so that we could speed up again.
Yeah, I mean, Vic, I'm sure this is sounding very familiar to you. So thanks, Vic, for joining us as well. It's
Thanks. Nice to be here.
Lovely. What can you tell us a bit from your perspective of sort of, you know, I guess the fractional HR director's view of some of the stuff that Saurav has been telling us about in his stories? What have you seen?
Yeah, course, yeah, and I think, you know, as I've been kind of jotting notes down as I've been listening to Saurabh as well, and it really does resonate from, you know, his journey in terms of the work I do with it, with the number of my clients as well. And so, you know, scaling is absolutely as much about people as it is about product or service. So, you know, it's never really too early and to start thinking about culture, leadership, and people strategy, because, you know, so one of the biggest mistakes I see when I, you know, with clients I kind of go in and start working with, or, you know, what I need to kind of start really getting under the skin of is actually them defining a clear and compelling vision really early from day dot, you know, to Saurav's points as well. And I think companies that grow organically, you know, they grow organically, but then you really want to scale them, and so that vision needs to be really crystal clear. So it guides decisions. It, you know, you ensure you attract the right talent, build cohesive culture. Because without that, you know, I have seen, and my experience with these things is that the risk of losing your direction as a team expands is real. I think other experience and kind of observations I've had with working with clients who are preparing to scale is that if you ignore culture, it becomes a real problem. So, you know, culture isn't something that happens by accident. Companies really have to work on it. And I think it's something that MDs, you know, when you're sitting around a table with 4 people with a piece of paper, or, you know, going, right, I've got this great idea. Everyone's in one room, you all know what's going on. You know, I think that real DNA of the business as you scale, and comms is, you know, different channels, you're in different places, people have got kind of different deliverables. I think that the culture piece needs to be intentionally cultivated from day one, to, you know, really make sure that we're all on the same page driving it forward, and we all know our part to play in the overall vision. And I think the hiring piece that Sarah mentioned as well, absolutely, I couldn't not agree more with and I can absolutely say that I've experienced pains with clients that have wanted to grow, you know, getting great technical skills, getting great head of operations, head of commercial, you know, really good functional leads. It's really tempting to fall into a pitfall of hiring too quickly because we want to grow, and hiring for the wrong reasons. So, you know, people are good enough because we want to fill positions, and we need to keep moving forward. So I would, you know, the wrong hire can cause really long-term issues. And I know from real experience recently is unpicking that and breathing a little to make sure we're getting it right first time is absolutely that could be the difference between kind of really delivering and thriving, or just kind of striving through.
So how do you walk with a CEO and a leadership team who are saying, right, we've got some words on a bit of paper about our vision, and we've got some posters to put up around the office with what our values on. How do you get them from that to an embedded sort of different culture or appetite for delivering this vision?
I think posters on the wall are great, and having visuals and kind of reminders for people are super, but I'm a big believer in kind of live not laminated, in the way kind of you operate your business. So I think when I've worked to coach MDs and founders of businesses, and really kind of help them plan their long-term strategy, it's been about aligning to their leadership style. So it's your baby sometimes, and you're used to spinning a lot of plates, making sure that you've got your hands on, everything that's going on, and it's really difficult to kind of pull CEOs and founders back because they're passionate about it. It's their business. So I think it's really important to understand their natural leadership tendencies, and really keeping astute on that as the business evolves and grows. So, and to Saurav's point, he recognized that in himself, in terms of how do we empower, how do we delegate, how do we give people the tools to do the job, so that when you are delegating, you feel you're confident that the people around you, your senior leadership team, are on the same, understand the same vision, mission, values as you have. They're technically proficient to deliver, and the comms is really robust across, up and down. But it's a journey for CEOs, right? It is a right, okay, I don't need to know the minutiae on everything, because I am confident in my leadership team, in my technical expertise, to actually step up and take an integral part in things.
Yeah, it's interesting, isn't it? Because it's so easy to sort of sit and say, oh, we need an amazing leadership training program. We need to make leaders of leaders. We need to have, the ability to give good feedback. But actually behind all of that is hopefully a well-managed set of training programs, getting, people into training rooms and not just mysteriously being absent for that session that they can't quite be bothered to attend. And so it's easy, isn't it, to sort of say, here are some big things, some practical things that can really unlock some scalable growth. But actually the doing of it turns into sending that email to make sure person over there attends this training course and then has a bit of coaching and then a second one. So all of this strategic stuff is really important, but well, in fact, this really neatly, doesn't it, brings us onto building a scalable infrastructure, because strategic ideas are fantastic, but they turn into KPIs for team members and then for those leaders within the business. So let's dive in on this next section, building a scalable infrastructure. Saurav, I can imagine things were fairly chaotic in the early days. And, you see companies, don't you, as they grow, they go from a chaotic state to, well, ideally more of a sort of structured organization. But can you tell us a bit about some of the systems that you put in to help scale and manage that chaos and make it less crazy?
Yeah, 100%. So I think just before I dive into that, I think probably the what you mentioned earlier, I just want to comment on that quickly, because I think what happens a lot of times is that these tech and processes are great, but effectively there's a lot of change management around it, right? So and that's what I missed, I must say and confess. But thankfully, I had people around me who, in my team, in my exec team, in my leadership team, who advised me on that. I think they miss a lot of that. Like, hey, we're going to chuck in this system, that system, all of that. We put an amazing cutting edge performance management, review system, management system. It was amazing. It was a beautiful product. and then a year it failed. You know, it was because we didn't understand the change management around it, the change in thinking around it. And, you know, it was, so I think that's what we miss, especially in a lot of, you know, people who have techie CEOs who have a product background or a deeply commercial background. You know, I think they miss that. So I think I just wanted to mention that, aligning with your point, which is that it's the people side, even if you're doing if you're investing in the most cutting edge system, that's so critical. And I missed it as well. So I think where we did improvements, enhancements that are really helped us was around, you know, effective onboarding. Like I think Vic touched on it as well, right? Like I didn't realize how important it is, but thankfully I did. And it's you know, first step in the door. You want the most, so really creating a very, very strong onboarding program. Mid management, middle managers, upskilling. Obviously, we had the leadership programs for some of the execs, but it's really the, you know, 40 or 50 middle managers we had who were pretty much running the business, you know, in that sense. You know, they were more important than some, you know, than many of the others in the business. So those mid managers, giving them the tools, getting them empowered, really key. You know, company-wide goal setting. So, you know, we use a system of OKRs. I think you use a system that you like. There's no set rule. Everybody's got their own playbook. But having this company-wide goal setting is really, really important, because at one point, with the rate of growth you were having, we were, you know, sales and customer success was not aligned, right? And you're like, hey, what is going on? You know, you're doing some things that'll affect our retention. So that company or product was creating, sometimes not focusing on features that drive retention, because, you know, everybody's operating in silos at that breakneck speed. So having a company-wide goal setting, you know, we use a system of OKRs was really, really valuable. We also started really putting a lot of effort behind cross-functional knowledge sharing. So in our lunch and learn sessions, we would always get, you know, the marketing team to come and share what they're doing, or the product guys or what they're doing. So that cross-functional knowledge sharing, we've felt really, really helped us big time, because, you know, once you understand, you know, if you're in HR, you understand the finance team's perspective and their priorities, how they think, you know, how to, you know, align with their priorities, right? So I think that doesn't really happen as much. It didn't happen before, and we started doing that, and then we really, really improved internal communication, and that was for me a big, big learning exercise. That, you know, hey, communicate again, you know, and you just got to keep doing it across all the different channels you have, whether it's your all hands or your whether it's online, offline. So these were kind of the systems we put in place. Obviously, we used a lot of tech as well. So that was tech that was relevant to us, you know, tools like Notion for knowledge sharing internally, OKRs, all that kind of stuff, you know, and different types of tech. Again, tech is there. You can, you know, you have to find the tech that suits you most. But it's more about the underlying processes and the way of thinking and the mindset that goes behind the tech and the change management that makes the biggest difference. But these are some of the things that we did.
Yeah, well, and Vic, just to jump in there on you, from your perspective, how do you like to help companies go through that tech adoption? Or, you know, you've got a founder who wants to introduce a new system every 6 months. How do you balance that?
Yeah, and I've been, in fact, there's a retail client I'm working with at the moment, and they are super driven by process and efficiencies and technology, but actually, you know, it's also guiding them through in terms of what's fit for purpose, and actually, you know, what you know, to Saurav's point, what's scalable, and actually, is it going to deliver what we need and be adopted well by the individuals? You know, you can put some great tech in businesses and great systems and platforms and processes, but actually they've got to be executed well, and they've got to be embedded well into the business. I would say, as you scale, so say, for example, say as you go from maybe 50 to, you know, 100 people, in terms of I guess the framework, so, and what I would say kind of the key pieces, they are, you know, clear deliverables, clear accountability. You know, have we got something that's fit for purpose now, but is it a platform that can scale with us and can, you know, can help us longer term, not just so we, you know, we're running down to one side of the pitch following the ball and then the other all the time. So really kind of building that long-term strategy, and it's a balance, isn't it? It's about making sure we're delivering the KPIs, the OKRs weekly, monthly, but also keeping our eye on the right. So what's the North Star here, and what's the ultimate goal for the 12, 24, 5-year plan as well? I think the other piece around it, and interestingly, you know, as you scale, there's the age-old comment of, you know, things are changing around here. It doesn't feel like it used to. You know, had much more of a, you know, family feel. You know, all that great stuff that we're here. So I think, you know, no one wants to be a cog in a wheel, right? So it's how do you keep that feel of the business, and, you know, that, you know, how do you consider structure and stability and consistency for others as the business grows? So it'd be really helping managing directors, founders, senior teams maneuver that to make sure that people feel still part of it. And, you know, Saurav mentioned comms. You know, the number one thing I identify when I start working with SMEs and growing ambitious SMEs is, how do we make sure that comms is great? That's the single biggest issue that I find every time I go in business. Do we get that right? Lots of other things will flow from that.
And it's tricky to do, isn't it? Because it takes time, and you're split in so many directions. And I think, you know, there'll probably be people on the webinar today who are maybe have been through some periods of scaling in the past, but are maybe now not growing. It's a difficult economy out there, or maybe they're gearing up to grow. And so these things can sort of go in fits and starts, can't they? Not many companies grow 20% year on year, year in, year out. That's a really big ask. So, Saurav, that sort of agility piece, coping with that much change, how did you keep a sort of agile mindset where people were open to change, but at the same time increase number of people, structure, direction?
Yeah. So obviously in the world, you know, we were building Perkbox in the tech. You know, you have to constantly, you know, be agile in terms of needs of the customers, the needs of the people, the tech changes. So fundamentally, you know, you're probably repeating a cliche here, but you know, that test and learn approach is fundamental to you know, any business that I've built, any teams that I've built, and the culture of the team. So for me, you know, we always said, hey, it's, you know, you gotta keep testing, keep testing, keep testing. Obviously, there's predefined playbooks for a lot of what we do, which is the repeatability and scale. So, you know, there's certain things need to be done in a certain way. You know, if you have to enter, you know, something in Salesforce or, you know, an employee record, that's got to be in a certain way, you know. But around the margins, you know, there's got to be, we give them enough room to test and learn, and the opportunity to fail, right? I think that's what probably we don't do enough, right? You know, people are scared about failing, you know, and so I would say, you know, even now in my current business, hey, I did this, I tried this just didn't work as I went, right? And I think that's really, really important. So that agility comes from testing and learning. To test and learn, you should be in a, you know, psychologically safe environment where you can fail and people will look at that as a positive. So we actively encourage our teams to do these tests, learn, and fail, and share with us where they failed, because we celebrated failure and said, hey, what did not work out this week? You know, it's amazing these numbers are going to tell us what didn't work, and more importantly, what did you actually learn from it? Because ultimately, it's about that learning that goes through. So I think for us, and again, empowering the people, because again, the front line, the people know the best, right? And you can come up at the top with a system, hey, we're going to roll this out, this is going to do amazing things because my board member told me this, or my investor told me this, or my, you know, my CEO buddy told me this. It doesn't mean anything. You know, you got to empower your people. They'll say, okay, that is okay, but that only solves 10% of my problem. Here's 90% of the problem. And if you empower them the right way, and they're aligned to the culture, and they're aligned to the values of the organization, they will come up with solutions. And I think that's why the people alignment is so important for agility, is that if they're passionate about the business, they're aligned to the mission, they will give you solutions. Hey, I have an idea, you know? And so I think that empowerment keep coming back to it. So empowerment, letting people fail, testing and learn approach. And then we also adopted this model of, you know, in obviously, usually it's product engineering teams that do sprints. We kind of expanded that across the company. So even a marketing team, you're doing a sprint, you know, your HR team, what's in your sprint? Because that drives that mindset of agility. And hey, I've got to push something, get retros. So you do something, you deploy it, and you do retros, which is, hey, what worked, what didn't work, what are we going to change next time? So going in with the assumption that at least in tech, a lot of things you try don't work. So in some of the industries, probably there's a lower ratio of things not working. So I think that's how we maintain the agility while ensuring that we have repeatability at scale, while we're codifying the knowledge, and we have some playbooks that are repeatable.
Yeah. So it's really interesting, both that agility, but you sort of alluded back to your mini CEO concept for me, and that, leaders of leaders. Vic, have you taken any clients? I mean, how do people respond when you say management leadership training for the middle managers is going to be a game changer? This is what we could do. This is what we could deliver. How do you, does that what, like, do you go into clients and they're receptive to that, or do they sort of think it's a box?
Yeah, that's a really interesting question, actually. And I think it's a bit of both. I think it depends on who you're sitting in front of, how invested they are in that, and really kind of how mature their thinking is in terms of joining the dots between performance and, and delivery. So there is, I suppose the challenge from a people perspective is that, there's a legacy of, we'll put someone on a course and they'll come back and they'll be able to deliver and they'll be brilliant. And actually what happens is the people go on a course, they come back, they're really upbeat for 2 days, then they just go back to doing what they're used to. And that's a very tongue-in-cheek, but that's kind of the perception of a lot of MDs, a lot of leaders, that HR are there just to put people on courses. So I think there's a real education, I suppose, want of a better word, around a blended learning. What can people take from the team around them, from kind of osmosis, and really learning from other people's mistakes? I thought it was a really interesting comment, and really, really resonated with me about having, let's not be scared to make mistakes, because, when we're kids and we're learning, that's what happens, right? To increase our knowledge. We seem to, as we grow up and go into businesses, not be able to show that we don't know everything in case it's a vulnerability or or something that might expose you. But I think it's so important to bring that authenticity of, this is the stuff that my area of development is, and this is what I need help with. However, I can throw this into the pot so we can continually evolve together as a collective. I absolutely think that depending on the business you are. So I work with a professional services business, a team of architects who have a really brilliant, and we've developed a really brilliant org design so that it's much less hierarchical, and there's a real fluidity from learning and applying mentoring versus mentoring. So I think there's I could probably do another webinar on this, to be honest, because this is a real kind of piece where it's a game changer, I think. So it's gone are the days where HR are going to kind of sign you up for a course, and it's got to be the lifeblood. It's got to be embedded into the business.
Yeah. We're going to come on to this, actually. So just a quick aside, if you've got a question that you want my lovely guest to answer later on, please pop it in the chat, because we're going to have a few minutes for questions at the end. But let's talk now about managing the human side of growth, because we're, leaders of leaders, mini CEOs, playbooks of hiring. There is so much here we've already touched on the human side. So, Saurav, what were the biggest people-related challenges, I guess, both at Perkbox or actually at your new business, 5minutes.ai? We haven't talked much about that yet, but you're going again.
Yeah.
So it was obviously there was some fantastic bits, as well as I imagine it being quite a hard slog at times. But can you tell us about some of those challenges that you've faced?
Yeah, I think just kind of referring back to one of the points we discussed, it is around, and Vic mentioned as well, it's just organizational alignment, on mission, vision, and values. And perhaps I underestimated it in the early days. You're so focused on growth, revenue, all that stuff that's happening, that sometimes leaders, founders lose perspective on what's most important, which is that organizational alignment. Because that's what drives long-term success of the business. So yeah, I think we were probably not as organizationally aligned as we should have been. So that was across different teams. Different teams had different priorities. So whether it's through repetition around here's our mission, vision, and values, and do we need to change it? Yes, we need to change it because the business evolves. Cultural alignment, right? What is culture, right? What is culture? People define culture in different ways, right? We did a lot of cool things. We had awesome team drinks. We had the ping pong tables. That's not culture, right? So understanding, getting people to understand, hey, what is really our culture, and that comes from the people. So I think that was a challenging in that because that your board members are not going to ask you that. I mean, at least in tech companies, a lot of tech PCs will not ask you, hey, tell me about your culture. It's more around, hey, what's your CAC LTV? What's your gross margin, right? So I think those are the things that we had to work hard on. And obviously we had a brilliant exec team and leaders who we collectively did that. And it was a big learning exercise for me. So I think that was a big kind of challenge, which we, at the right time sorted out. I think the other one, which is why I started my new venture, is that, ensuring that people are constantly growing is really, really important. I think, I mean, you are experts in this, so you probably know this a lot more than but what I recollect, why people join or leave an organization, the most talented people, the people who really drive your business, are fundamentally for growth, right? It is people want to grow. We are naturally very curious. We all want to grow. We all want to get better. That's embedded in our human nature, right? And that's why people leave an organization, besides the fact that I may not have the best manager. That's one, right? That's one reason people leave, or they're not aligned with the mission has changed or whatnot. But ultimately it's like, hey, I'm not growing enough. I feel like I've reached my ceiling, right? So I think that was the other challenging. How do you retain this top quality talent that we had managed to hire, who are really passionate, but somewhere along the journey, they feel they've stopped growing and complacency creeps in. So that was personally quite frustrating for me to sometimes to see that journey of incredibly talented people somehow along the way either stop growing, which is why I started my new venture, which is all about, hey, how do we make sure that we can nurture that curiosity in individuals consistently over the duration in an organization, so they come out much stronger, better, empowered, powerful, and they feel like they have grown in the business. So I think those were the kind of three challenges I would say around alignment, making sure that people are constantly growing, and as a result, we keep the best a talent that we managed to hire.
And have you got any tips around the communication of that alignment? Like, how do you be transparent, either when you're trying to go and get new investors or there's been a bit of a drama? I mean, communication's tricky, isn't it? Because you want to say enough, but you don't want to give away all of your leadership things that you're thinking about right now. You don't want to say too much. So how did you find, and Vic, I'll probably ask you a bit more about that communication and transparency in a minute, but how did you find that, Saurav?
Yeah, so again, for me, it was a learning exercise, because I've never run a company this big, and I probably managed two people before at one point, and then I went from 2 to 250. So it was a big learning exercise for me. I think first is the cadence, right? So everybody's got their own cadence. You define your cadence, right? So for us, it was around just weekly updates, obviously from coming down from me and the exec team members, and hey, what's been happening in the business? Not just the good, but the bad, and if we could share the ugly as well. So I think it's really important, as Vic was saying earlier, to be really honest, authentic, vulnerable. Your people are very smart. If you've hired the right people and they're trained the right way, they're really, really smart. So the best thing you can do is be honest and get their advice and feedback in areas that you can't solve. So that was really, really key, which is around this cadence of weekly updates, positive and negative, to the extent it's possible to share. We did obviously, this was online. At first, we were doing it weekly updates in person. Then we got to a scale where it was not possible, so we do monthly all hands in person. Ask me anything, and really all kinds of questions were asked. So, but at least it demonstrated the transparency. So I think that's really, really important. We published our OKRs across all teams to the whole company, so everybody could see what different teams were focused on. And sometimes they would identify that themselves and say, hang on a second, why is this team's OKR not aligned with my OKR or our team's OKR? This doesn't seem aligned. If they're going to do this, that's going to hurt me here. So that OKR transparency across the whole company, whether you use OKR or whatever framework you use, it doesn't matter, but making it pretty transparent is really, really key. The other thing we did was that, we try to, whenever we made a decision, we try to explain the decision in written. So I'm a big fan of Amazon's philosophy of writing documents, and that's really, really personally has helped me out a lot when you really think through, write a document as a discussion point, which then you share with the team. And the same thing for decisions. If a decision has been made where multiple people in the organization have had input to, it's important to publish that and explain why a certain decision was made, just for company knowledge, codifying the knowledge, but at the same time being transparent. And again, obviously not everybody's going to agree with what you decided. So we also have that. I'm a big fan of the principle of disagree and commit. So, you know, there are many times I didn't agree sometimes with a decision that was made by the exec team, but I committed to it, and I expected the same from my colleagues as well, to disagree and commit, as long as the decision has been explained and why it was made in a certain way. So these are some of the things that we use to manage the transparency and communication.
Yeah, fantastic. Vic, how you talked about communication earlier being a sort of number one priority for business leaders. What have you got, any sort of top tips, put you on the spot, that you can share?
No, it's fine. And actually, I would absolutely echo, you know, what Saurav's just said. I think he mentioned that, you know, people leaving the business because they become kind of disenfranchised and they're not growing. But I also think that, you know, people leave businesses where they don't feel the messaging from the leadership is authentic and transparent. You know, you've got to treat your teams as adults. You've got to treat them as internal consumers. And you've got to treat them as your equals, right? So that's what I would always, you know, that's kind of the litmus test, I think. So I think there's a balance of how you drive that and how you are authentic, but also how you distill it to them, because, you know, people can become overwhelmed. You know, if you've got diverse teams, and, you know, people information is going to land, messages are going to land differently. So how do you distill that and cascade that through your leadership team or across teams to make sure it's measured and you're not frightening people to death or overwhelming them, but also that, you know, it is really open, and actually you're welcoming their feedback, because you brought these people into the business for their skill set, their knowledge, their experience, and also the individuals they are, that, you know, their behavioral competencies. So I'd say it's, you know, it's a two-way street. So, you know, communication isn't just something that's pushed down, but it's, you know, how do we encourage people to come to the table and talk about how, and also the why, so that everyone's, you know, on board with, okay, yeah, I think that's a really great phrase, that kind of you know, not necessarily having to agree, or disagreeing and committing. I think that's a great phrase, because not everything's going to go your way, right? And but actually there's a common sense approach as a collective, isn't there? So, you know, it's give and take. But I think coming together with people and making sure there's consistency and authenticity all along with comms. What I would say about communication is, don't kind of, you know, have a cadence around it, because what you don't want to do is have, you know, people feeling just change fatigue. You know, they're hearing lots of messages all the time, they can't keep up, and something else has happened the week after, because that is real. And, you know, you do get people who lack empathy around that. So it's really understanding your audience.
Yeah. So how do you coach CEOs to evolve their leadership as the company matures and develop those comm skills? Because it's a journey, isn't it? Saurav's a classic, went from managing 2 to ending up leading a business of 250 people. And you're learning that job in full view of loads of other, as you say, peers, adults, people who are going to think some of the stuff you do is great and some of it's terrible. So how do you sort of sit alongside or walk alongside CEOs going through all of?
Yeah. Okay. So I think the first thing is being human, you know, and actually, you know, demonstrating that there are, you know, you have some fallibilities. So you know that the business is really ambitious. You know, you have come in to lead it, but you bring in subject matter experts around you to make sure there's you know, a real holistic skill set and experience around you, and actually being brave enough to face into that. So when you've got a subject matter expert, you know, having a healthy challenge around the table and being able to take that feedback from others. As opposed to the point I mentioned earlier, and I'm just conscious I don't repeat myself, and it is, I think the biggest fundamental is actually being able to let go and being able to flex your style. So you don't have to have the knowledge of everything that's going on under the roof. to know that the business is thriving. It's about kind of really trust and being explicit in terms of how people are accountable to delivering for you. So that, I mean, it's multifaceted. I'd love to say I can bottle it, and say, well, there you go, just take 2 of these every day. But it's an absolute spectrum depending on the individual and the CEO's makeup as well, isn't it?
Yeah, it is. Look, we're coming sort of towards the end of our time together. I've got some questions that have arrived. If there's any more, please whiz them into the chat. So here's a question. Maybe Saurav, this is personal for you, but Vic, maybe a bit more general. What's the biggest leadership blind spot you've seen in founders trying to scale? Saurav, I don't know if anyone helpful held up a mirror to you at any point.
Yeah. Oh, that's a good one. What is the biggest blind spot? I think I couldn't say there's just one. I think there's a few, right?
Yeah.
And I think I think a lot of founders, again, I'm going to talk about founders more than perhaps in high growth. They obsess a lot about the external factors, right? Like competition, customers. They don't obsess as much about their people and treat them as internal customers, right? I think, as you said, Vic, the employees should be, when you're saying customer centric, it should not just be for external customers, because if your internal customers are not happy, you're, So I think that's not enough. I think that that obsession is just very external focus, and that's, by the way, what you hear. All the press that we hear in the tech world, is anchoring you to that. So I think that is a blind spot that one needs to recognize, which I think is it's not there. I think perhaps there's too much. The blind spot is perhaps not enough listening. I think there's just so much like, hey, this is what we're gonna do. I've grown to this level, so I must know something. But what got you, from a 1 to 10 may not get you from 10 to 50 or 10 to 100, right? So I think that not enough listening, I think, is consistently an issue, and encouraging people to disagree with you. Like, I did not do that in the early days. I was like, hey, this is what we're gonna do. Now I say, hey, what could go wrong here? Like, what am I missing here? What's wrong? I need someone to tell me that something is wrong here, because it's not possible that there's nothing wrong with the plan. There's no perfect plan. So I think that's probably a couple of things I can throw out there that I think big leaders, leaders who've grown fast growth companies, or just generally who've built a strong business, are pretty. They're that's their blind spot, is not listening perhaps enough, or encouraging that speak up culture. And then another one probably is that this is more kind of falling for the shiny new trap. Like, hey, this is this new thing that again, my CEO buddies or founder buddies are saying, or my investors are saying. So those are 3 I would say that don't fall for the shiny new trap thing. And too much external obsession, not enough internal obsession, and that ties into the third point around perhaps not listening enough or encouraging people to disagree.
Yeah, Vic, is there anything you'd add to that?
I think all those things are absolutely spot on. I think there's also a piece around balancing the head with the heart, and and getting that balance of what's the data telling us, but actually what's the human overlay of that to make a really rounded decision. And I think CEOs and MDs can be very tunnel vision, or one or the other a lot of the time, but it's actually getting to step back and and say, okay, well, that's what the data's saying, but what are we really trying to do here? What's the exam question? And actually, are we thinking of all the a really rounded answer to provide us with a solution?
Yeah, I think for me, the thing I found hardest with People Puzzles growing was that I absolutely loved sort of being at the helm of a little dinghy. And I coped when it got to, maybe, I don't know, a bit of a smaller yacht, let's say. And that sort of nimbleness and the ability to just get my hands dirty and change things myself. But actually realizing that you cannot do that as the organization turns into a tanker or I don't know, a bit of a cruise ship. And it takes that much more time and planning to change course. And I just might, you talked a lot, Vic, didn't you, about the personality of the leader and the things they like doing, and sort of their strengths and maybe their associated weaknesses with some of those things. But getting my head around the fact that I couldn't just do what I wanted anymore, I found really difficult, a sort of painful journey, I guess.
Can I just add to that, just on that point as well? I think there's a shift change as businesses scale about leaders working on the business rather than in the business. And I know a lot of the coaching that I do, with a number of clients is actually, you don't need to be doing all this tactical operational stuff. Actually, how are we going to step back and look at the business to improve it, as opposed to in the business doing?
Yeah, yeah. Well, I've got an interesting question here from the Q&A. How does government legislation such as ESG help to contribute towards growth? I mean, in a way, it's an interesting question. Is it a growth? Is it a barrier? There's lots of different legislation changes and external factors coming at us all the time. Have either of you general comments on this? Do you think it helps growth, this legislation and ideas coming through?
Well, I'm a big advocate of ESG, as you know, Ally. So, and I think HR plays a fundamental part of driving all three of those pillars. I think it probably depends what sort of business you are and kind of what the constraints are that govern you in terms of industry sector size, who you're selling to, etc. I think from a talent and a consumer perspective, certainly my observations are finding great talent and keeping great talent is that businesses have great ESG, probably they've got great sustainability. People want to work for a socially conscious business, an environmentally conscious business, and that's growing all the time. I'm hearing about that all the time. From when I interview candidates right through to kind of how they set up their social value community projects as well. So I think it can be it can unlock a lot of things in terms of, consumers want to buy from businesses they feel are doing a great job and are fair and are, you only have to look at kind of the news when you switch it on about, people in uproar about the water companies, the utility companies. People want to buy from businesses who are fair, sustainable, transparent in the way they operate, and, and honest, because it makes them feel good about themselves as consumers.
Yeah, yeah. Brilliant. Well, look, I'm gonna sort of bring us into land. Just a few thoughts I want to leave you with from some of the things Saurav and Vic have said today, things that really resonated with me. You have to change from being growth obsessed to people obsessed. I'm going to love that, aren't I, being the founder of People Puzzles. But building a business where that middle management become leaders. And I just was thinking, can you imagine having a business where your middle managers are just brilliant and take the pressure off you and make great decisions in line with the values and the direction of the business, and just what a difference that would make to the diaries or to the sort of mental pressure of the senior leaders if so much less stuff is coming up to you because you've got amazing middle managers. I imagine some business leaders sort of think that's a bit of a dream, but actually it's perfectly possible to build that into your system. But it does take some operational management to do those things. How do you build repeatability at scale? I thought that, Saurav, was such an excellent point because it gets you out of the chaos and it means you're getting great results that you can turn out again and again. And so it's not about the individual brilliance of one person, it's about a structure and a system that is delivering growth for you. And some really excellent ideas like a playbook of hiring, an excellent onboarding, manager training. And Vic, I loved your values need to be lived, not laminated, because putting them on the wall just isn't enough. And then that sort of ability to cope with change and change coming year after year with new tech after new tech. How do you keep your team resilient and agile and not just getting so fatigued that they're exhausted and they go and work somewhere else where things don't look like they're changing quite as fast? So how do you, and I think again we haven't even got onto that sort of training, how do you train agility and resilience and those change management skills into everybody in your organization? And then having we talked quite a lot about comms, didn't we? So having a great cadence, having publicly available OKRs or targets or however you share that information, and make sure you explain really well the decisions that you're taking, because not everyone's going to agree, but actually if they see that you have listened to their point of view, they're going to come on the journey with you to the next bit. So people can disagree but still commit. And then, you know, maybe address your blind spots if you're a leader, if there's things that are holding you back. Some of those things might actually end up interfering with your scaling or with your growth. So it's really worth looking at that. So thank you, guys. It's been really brilliant. I've thoroughly enjoyed talking to you. I've been thinking about people puzzles in the background with so much of what you said, and I'm definitely going to take some of those things on myself. Please do get in touch with People Puzzles if anything has resonated with you. We'd love to connect it with you. We've got teams of people all over the country. We're going to be running our next webinar on accelerating growth through investment. Don't have a date for that yet, but please keep your eyes peeled on LinkedIn, and we'll be sending that out for sure. And again, as I always say, if you've got anyone you want to share the recording with, we'll make that available if you think anyone else would benefit from hearing these wise words from Saurav and Vic. And please do get in touch with us, LinkedIn, email, and it just leaves me to say thank you so much, you guys. It's been brilliant.
No, thank you.
Thank you very much. Thanks for having me. Okay, thanks everyone for joining. Bye.
Fantastic. Bye, guys. So yeah, we'll be in touch with the recording. Thank you.